Hello, everyone, and welcome to this CV webinar titled Advocating for Investments in African Rainfed Agriculture. I'm Radhika Gupta, Communications Manager at CV, and I will be facilitating today's sessions from our Stockholm headquarters. We will explore ways to attract finance and investments to rainfed agriculture. This is a practice that is so widespread in Africa that 95% of food production relies solely on rainwater. Yet, this sector receives only 5% of public agricultural money. There's clearly a need to address this mismatch. The Zambezi Rainfed Agriculture Investment Forum, which will take place from 8th to 9th August in Botswana, will present opportunities to form partnerships that level up financial commitment from both public and private sectors. It will be a key moment for climate smart investments as the 8 member states of the Zambezi Watercourse come together to show their commitment to policy changes that support rainfed agriculture. This is also an important step to disrupt rural poverty and make Africa a food secure continent. The forum will be hosted by the government of Botswana, convened by the Zambezi Watercourse Commission, known as ZAMCOM, in partnership with CV, Global Water Partnership Southern Africa, and C4ECRAF. I strongly recommend you to stay back until the end of the webinar to hear more about the forum, as we take you through the agenda of the forum and open the floor for any questions that you may have. My colleague Cecile Hugh is here to provide technical support today. And now we'll move on to the panel discussion on opportunities for investments and attracting private investors. The panel is going to be moderated by my colleague Shanani Baloi, who's joining from Pretoria, who's our program officer for CV's Africa Regional Center. On the panel today, we have Lydie Manure, a consultant to CV, who advises on innovative financing and partnership models that have the potential to scale up impacts. Arlene Mitchell, also a CV consultant, who is the co-founder of Region Innovation Inc., which is a not-for-profit entity dedicated to providing donor funds to smallholder farmers in Africa and Iraq. Maimbo Malesu, who is the country coordinator for C4ECRAF Zambia. Felix Gamlagosi, executive secretary of ZAMCOM Secretariat. And Mark Harrison, founder and CEO of Callisto Gran, which is a credit/order-to-cash training company. I now hand over to you, Shanani.
Oh, thank you, Radhika. Yes, I'm sitting in Pretoria at CWI's Africa Regional Center, and I'm excited for this panel discussion that we are about to get into. And just to recap, our panelists today will be discussing around the topic or the issue that we have found with the talks and the ideas of enhancing rainfed agricultural systems on the African continent tend to have a mismatch with what the investors are looking for. So not finding the right projects to finance, or maybe in their language, bankable projects, or maybe commercially viable projects. So I'm going to start off right away with Mr. Malesu, who we've been working with in the Tiara program, and want to find out really how is rainfed agriculture currently funded on the continent, and what have been the gaps that we have been able to identify thus far.
Okay, thank you very much, Shanani. In the work that we have been doing under Tiara, I think we've been able to identify quite a number of mechanisms that are currently used in Africa to finance rainfed agriculture. And to a large extent, most of the financing is coming from the public, philanthropic funding, as well as our traditional donors that we have in Africa, like the European Union, the USAID, etc. So this public financing has got its own ups and downs in that usually the funds coming from governments are not enough. And the governments usually support farmers to buy the inputs like seed and fertilizer. And as you are aware, with the current global situation, fertilizers are very expensive and have become really unaffordable for farmers to buy. So it's really important that we find other ways and means through which we can make rain-fed agriculture more attractive in terms of especially productivity. So we are seeing other mechanisms like where we have contract farming, which is coming through certain value chains that have been identified. Most of them are lucrative ones like legumes, like groundnuts, soybean. We are seeing a lot of financing coming through those value chains. But then there are also other areas where we are seeing financing coming through, carbon financing. I know carbon financing is something that is relatively new, because when you're looking at the below carbon monitoring, we do not have methods that have really been tested, but most of it is coming, to finance above ground, carbon. Then we have payment for ecosystem services. I think that is a model that has been tested in East Africa. In Tiara, we are trying to develop models in Malawi where we can actually compensate farmers, for conserving their land and making it more productive and more attractive for private to participate. So those are some of the innovative mechanisms that are there. There are many of them, but predominantly I can say that the public financing is one of the main ones. But then we also have the contract farming, which is quite prominent as well. So we are seeing a lot of challenges and gaps which are arising from markets which are very difficult for the smallholder farmers to access. They do not really have, control over the price of the produce. And that really discourages them sometimes, because now the inputs are expensive, but the price cannot be guaranteed. So there's really need for us to create more awareness on this knowledge being more widely available for communities to be able to actually practice more of enhanced or conservation farming practices that can improve their productivity.
Thank you, Malesu. I'll move over to Mitchell. You raise capital in East Africa, and you've heard that Malesu has mentioned that the public sector is the predominant financier of enhanced rain-fed agriculture on the continent. How then can we incentivize the private sector to be engaged in this sector?
Well, you can't really incentivize someone. You can discuss with them, you can cajole, you can plead, you can do anything you want. But I think the beauty of this is that CIWI has already done that. And they've done that because you have documented and you have aligned yourself with 3 different NGOs in 3 different areas, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi. And what you're doing is getting all that data collection to be able to get that as basically a due diligence process for an investor to step in and say, look, we're looking at all the progress that you've made. Now, I would say that the next step would be, after that documentation, is to have a concept of a farm that was invested in, a collection of farms that was invested in, that has then created a yield beyond because of that investment. And so to highlight that as a type of a pilot project would be really helpful to bring that to an investor. And when I say investor, I really mean, an investor, someone that could be development finance, as Liddy will tell you about. It could be low interest loans. It could be microfinance. It could be many different vehicles. And the vehicle, the finance, is the very important thing that we need to discuss. And this is what we're going to be covering in Botswana in just a few short weeks. So I think that my background has told me the difficulties, and yes, there are many, and there's many obstacles, but in the aggregation of all of these smallholder farms, that is the opportunity at scale. Investors are always looking for the scale. We are taking the scale, putting it on a platter, and saying, here you go. So if that's not incentive, I really don't know. So I'm very excited about this opportunity because I don't see many things like this in my career, which has spanned 14 years, primarily in East Africa. And now I'm thrilled to be working in South Africa. So thank you very much. And I hope I covered everything. If I haven't, Shanani will tell me.
All right. Yes. So moving on with our panel and trying to keep to time, I'll ask you to limit it to 2.5 minutes or so. I'll move on still from the private sector perspectives. Mark, what are the prerequisites for investing in rainfed agriculture for the private investor, and what does the appetite look like from your experience?
Okay. Yes. Big broad question, thank you. It's I must admit I'm fairly new to this. I met Arlene about a year ago, and we started talking about this. And although, as you said in the introduction, my company is primarily a training company in finance and so on, and I'm based in Central and Eastern Europe. So all our clients, the companies that we work with, are major corporates. All the well-known names in whether it's petrochemicals or pharmaceuticals or whatever. Well recognized names. So ours is very much more kind of like a field of dreams sort of approach, if you like. I think it's we're kind of raising awareness. And I think every corporate has a corporate social responsibility, mission statements or something like that, or now it's ESG, is environment, social, and governance. But in both of those, CSR and ESG, the S in the middle stands for social, right? And the social thing at the end of the day is about people. So we're very much just kind of raising awareness, and like in October. We're having a conference of our own, primarily a conference in our area of finance. But there's 200 people going to come, and they're coming from about 50 or 60 different companies. Arlene and Una are going to be doing a presentation about what's going on in Regen and this, the initiatives here. And what we're really expecting is that a number of the people in the audience, although they're not necessarily decision makers themselves, they'll be going back to their companies and saying, hey, look, I really like us to get on board this, and to donate some of our charity monies or set up a new fund or something, and really get involved, because a number of these global companies will have presence in Africa anyway, so it's I think it's in everybody's collective interest. So yes, I guess we're coming at this from perhaps a different dimension, but we're very committed and we're very passionate about this, and we really want to sort of fly the flag for what's going on, because we're all concerned about climate change, which at the end of the day, I guess that's what's impacting a lot of these initiatives, and we're just kind of bringing the people working in the offices closer to the actual real projects, right, and for them to actually kind of see what you guys are doing and really dedicating your lives to. And we're trying to bring these two things together, and like I say, I'm very passionate about this, and I'm looking forward to doing whatever we can in our small way to fly the flag for what you guys are doing.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. I'd like to hand over quickly to Lydie about, you can speak more about the incentive-based mechanisms like payment for ecosystem services. How are these being used to attract private sector engagement in rainfed agriculture?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to say about payment for ecosystem services, which are also called payment for environmental services, because there are so many different types of PES that have been implemented globally, but also more recently in Africa. But just to put it simply, the PES is just a way to protect nature resources like air, water, land, ecosystem, with providing funding incentives or remuneration to people like the farmers who are taking care of these natural resources throughout their work. So let's take an example. Those grain-fed agriculture farmers, they heavily rely on water, and if they adopt the right practices, if they plant trees, if they manage better the soil quality and the water, you know, they can manage to also protect and take care of the nature resources. So that's a principle underlying with the PES mechanism. So to respond to your question on how it could attract private sector funding, I think it's a way of channeling, it's one way of channeling private sector funding. So you can have, for instance, companies that directly benefit from those services, those environmental services. We can talk about beverage company, for instance, or private water utilities, which have a strong interest in having water quantity and quality for their products and services. But you also can have companies that would invest into environmental conservation to offset their own carbon emission from their operation. And now we're talking about the voluntary carbon credit market, which has been growing over the past couple of decades. So there would be so much to say about different type of PES and how they can attract investment, but there's definitely a way for these instruments to capture more private sector investment. And that's why during the forum, we want to present different type of PES, because as I said, there's different type of them, and then see what are the opportunities behind these mechanisms to channel more funding between public and private sector.
Thank you, Lydie. We'll now move on to governments and the role of policymakers in terms of how can we capture the private sector to invest in enhanced rainfed agriculture. And I hand over to Felix, who will speak from the role of the governments exactly into how can they capture private sector investments in enhanced rainfed agriculture.
Thank you. The private sector in the context of rain-fed agriculture is very large and diverse. You know, it ranges from micro farmers, small farmers, to medium size and large enterprise. And talking about the Zambezi, in the Zambezi watercourse with the 8 riparian states, the sector, the private sector, involves millions of people. And this sector has a very significant untapped potential, investment potential, that can make a major contribution to agricultural investments and to also, you know, help offset the declining public investments. Now, in order to attract private sector investments into rain-fed agriculture and to increase agricultural competitiveness, the governments in the Zambezi region and in other places in Africa need to create an appropriate investment-friendly climate. But this is a wide topic. What does it include? It includes, among other things, government to put in place stable and non-interventionist transparent policies in the agricultural supply chain in general. But also the governments need to promote local agricultural products. Local agricultural products need to be demanded. And the one institution that is better placed to create demand is the government. And number 3,
okay, we seem to have a connection error there. All right, you're back, Felix. Do you want to quickly finish?
Yes. I was talking about the conducive environment, the investment-friendly climate, and I was saying that we need to promote demand for local agricultural products, but also put in place basic infrastructure for transportation, for storage systems, for agricultural products, but also provide the basics like food safety inspection services, agricultural education research services, extension services to the farmers. But more also important, the government need to put in place a reliable energy, access to energy, access to information, and the communication technologies to the farmers. Thank you.
Thank you for those excellent points in terms of the role from the government. I would like to tie this together by inviting our panelists again to make one point in terms of the overarching questions of why is it crucial for us to tackle the mismatch between the ideas of rainfed agriculture on the continent and the interests of the private sector. So if you are ready, Malesu, I'll hand over to you in a minute. Please give your point, and then we're gonna move along to the rest of the speakers here.
Yes, to make rain-fed agriculture attractive to the private sector, I think there is a great need to make techniques, simple and affordable technologies that farmers can employ to improve their productivity. Currently, the productivity is low. An example of maize, for example, we have less than 1 ton per hectare production, when potentially on station you can go between 8 to even 10 tons per hectare. So really that is something that really needs to be looked at. We need to pass this knowledge. Extension is weak, but we need to find ways in which farmers can get this knowledge, apply the knowledge, and that can help them to increase their productivity to even 3- or 4-fold from the techniques that we have demonstrated out there in the field. Incorporating not only water management, but also agroforestry is very effective in making the system more resilient to climate change impacts. So that is something that needs to be looked at to make sure that agriculture, rain-fed agriculture is more productive and thus more attractive to the private sector for investment.
Thank you. And for you, Mitchell, one point about why it is crucial that we address this mismatch.
Agreed completely with Malesu that really it all kind of goes hand in hand with the government wants the private sector to be invested in, rain-fed agriculture as well as all nature-based solutions, right? That's the way that we all agree is the way it needs to be going forward. So maybe there's a change of policy, maybe there certain things have to be examined from the government and from the public sector in order to fund more training programs and to give the tools needed to be able to understand and actually to implement rain-fed agriculture. So I agree. And, it's kind of, the private sector, I can almost hear in my head saying, rain-fed agriculture, are you kidding me? In a way, but people sometimes investors don't know what they don't know. So I think again, more reason to join us in Botswana to learn more. Thank you.
All right, and then handing over to you, Mark, your last point also about the overarching question.
How to make an investment attractive. Yeah, so I think we read a lot about employees these days want to work for companies that have some kind of ethical standards. They're very conscious about who they're working for, and one of the kind of phrases pushed around these days is employer branding. So what's attractive to potential talent to go and work for a company, and I think connecting with projects like this is very much what that people would like to hear. I'm talking about younger generations. That they if they're going to work for a company that's directly associated with the projects that that you guys are running, I think that makes it a very attractive thing. And perhaps one of the areas that needs to be highlighted or could be highlighted is if there is like a direct connection between, if a big corporate is involved in this project, if they could like directly have like a direct relationship with whichever project it is that they're working with. So forgive me, I'm not very technical on all of this, but if they if they could actually see how things were progressing in one particular farm or one particular area, I think that to me the investment is obviously the monetary side of things is critical, and that's the bottom line of what we're talking about. But I think if there's an emotional investment as well, you know, I think that makes these projects very attractive if people can really touch it and feel it and really see what's going on, right? So I think that's another aspect of investment that's not all just hard cold business finance. You know, it's an emotional investment, which is really important, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark, for touching on the social aspects of it. Liddy, and for you quickly, what would you like to highlight as your parting words for this overarching question?
Yeah, I'd like to highlight, just to talk about the PES and the carbon market again. You know, we can see there's a huge potential. So last year, the amount announced in terms of potential investment using this instrument is about $6 billion until by 2030. So that's a big amount. But on the other side, you want that money to primarily goes to the farmers. And we know that in the carbon market, it's been a challenge that has been criticized mostly for not benefiting fully the farmers or the local communities. So that's where I think and that public sector policymakers and private sector should work hand in hand so that we can ensure that the primary beneficiary stays the farmers locally.
Yeah. And last but not least, Felix, I'll hand over to you, maybe from the perspectives of government again, why it would be important to continue to tackle this mismatch within the rainfed agriculture sector and the investments from the private sector.
Yes, this is an important matter. There is this mismatch in many areas, but one which I can focus on is private sector need transparent policies, especially issues to do with the access to land, the land policies, you know, exit and entry into farming business should be clear and transparent. But also, governments expect private sector to come in and, but also on the other side, you know, come in and invest. But on the other side also, some governments create limitation and controls of prices of products, agricultural products, and creating limits to export of crops into, you know, lucrative markets in other countries. So those need to be addressed by the countries for the private sector to really have that confidence in investing in rainfed agriculture.
Well, thank you so much for all these points that have been put forward here. I am looking forward to moving along on the program. I see it's quite active also on the chat. So Radhika, I would like to hand over back to you and you take us through to the next points.
Yeah. So we'll now watch a 2-minute video about CV's Transforming Investments in African Rainfed Agriculture project, also known as TIARA.
Farmers are the frontline water managers of Africa. The African continent does not have the luxury of endless water supply during dry spells. A report from 2017 shows that 95% of public agricultural water investments are made towards irrigated agriculture, while only 5% of agriculture in Africa uses irrigated water. Gospel explains that after implementing the deep bed farming technique, he has much higher yields. There are ongoing case studies across Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Malawi.
We need to be thinking about a slow water movement.
Okay, so now moving on to our keynote, I welcome Krishnan Palasana, who's based in India. Krishnan has over 25 years of experience in sustainable development and the private sector. He's the Managing Director for India and the Global Lead for Strategic Engagement at Digital Green. Digital Green is working with over 4 million farmers across Africa and South Asia, leveraging the power of technology and partnerships to enhance income and strengthen resilience. Krishnan, given your experience of advocating for farmers' needs, here's a question for your keynote. With rapid climate change, what are the key arguments for attracting finance to the smallholder farmers in Africa who rely heavily on rainwater?
Thanks, Radhika. Hello, everyone. I'll come to that question specifically a bit later. The status of smallholder farmers and their invaluable contribution to maintaining rural productivity, employment, food security, and economy is well known and documented. Those millions of farmers are shouldering those monumental responsibility while reeling under increasing shocks and stresses due to climate and market variabilities, more so among the rain-fed agriculture system in Africa. It is therefore not an option anymore to significantly enhance financial and market support to the rain-fed farming sector in Africa. Financing this agriculture system is thus an essential imperative, a prerequisite to achieve sustainable development goals. But we need to find a way to bring critical investments into this sector. While all reasoning and logic point out to the imperatives of having higher investments to rain-fed agriculture, how do we make it happen? That's the question. My previous speakers also spoke about this. There are three typical investments type that we are looking at. We can broadly be classified as a philanthropic capital, private capital, and public capital. It is important for us to understand what drives these three types of capital inflow. Philanthropic capital, for example, what does it aim for? It aims to bring large-scale changes in the social and economic aspects of the society, in this case, through rain-fed agriculture. For this purpose, it is important for the sector at large to develop compelling evidence-based narratives to demonstrate how philanthropic capital can catalyze impact at scale. In our case, the impact is in terms of helping farmers build resilience, adopt climate-smart practices, reduce exposure to risk, and enhance productivity and reduce emissions. And there are a few aspects that we need to keep in mind when it comes to philanthropic capital. Articulate the problem philanthropic capital can solve and how it can bring about tangible shift in the status quo. Have an intervention logic that can generate evidence-based impact on ground and build a vision and roadmap for philanthropic capital to trigger large-scale investments and bring in private capital. The second is around private capital. What does private capital aim for? This aims for a higher return on their investment, their profit-making initiatives. So what we need to articulate is how private capital can make their case better, their business model better by investing in rain-fed sector in Africa, and how this rain-fed agriculture sector can be a client or a marketplace for them in the days to come. For this to happen, the private investors should have the confidence to invest in the African market that gives them a guarantee of reasonable return, low risk for their capital, and greater autonomy and flexibility to take decisions. We need to identify those investors who are into climate finance specifically. For example, renewable energy in climate sector, premium commodity markets, carbon credits, etc. And the things that we need to keep in mind is, again, generate evidences to show that potential the rain-fed agriculture market in Africa, market the opportunity through curated events, roadshows, and conventions, inspire the government to develop an ecosystem that builds confidence in the private investors, and have a plan to reduce exposure to risks for the private capital. For example, options for guarantees, first love capital, blended finance, etc. The third one is public capital. And this is the part that is handled by government, mostly through budgetary allocations. And often they take the support of bilateral, multilateral funding to meet its requirements. This should primarily aim for scaled initiatives, creating an enabling ecosystem, underwrite risks, and strengthen internal systems capacities of the government itself. And the things that we need to keep in mind is to have a larger vision and roadmap, because it's political in nature, and it will combine both farmers' interest as well as the market interests. Ensure this to be a bottoms-up approach. The second is to ensure that there are enough budgetary allocations to achieve this vision, including various components that will create an enabling environment. The third one is to incentivize impactful innovations that demonstrate value proposition at scale, social plus economic value. Today, we are finding that farmer collectives, like cooperatives in Africa, are becoming an increasing or playing an increasingly critical role. Cooperatives are mandated to serve and support farmers and can become the rallying point for both philanthropy, market actors to attract capital and finance. In digital green, for example, we have demonstrated this approach with reasonable success in countries like India and Ethiopia. Working with governments, science-based institutions, market actors, and farmer cooperatives, we have been able to create a strong data and digital platform that becomes the foundation upon which the private and public sector can build solutions. This data platform that we have developed for farmer collectives is helping us in various ways. The government extension system is able to provide targeted advisories to farmers based on the science-based content that we are receiving. And this helps farmers to adopt climate smart practices and reduce their risks. And it also helps the farmer to optimize fertilizer input and adopt newer and better practices on ground. This data is also used to estimate the changes in GHG gas emission from the farm sector. And as of now, is close to 1/3 of the global emissions is coming from farm sector. And this data also helps, this GHG emission data also helps the farmers to monetize this through potential carbon markets, etc. This data system.
Krishnan, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do you have any last wrapping up point for us since we're slightly over time?
Yeah, just in 30 seconds, I will close it.
Yeah.
This data system is owned by farmer collectives and giving them a clear decision support system. There are 3 points I would like to make to close it. Number one, rainfed agriculture in Africa holds the key to finding lasting solutions to global food and nutrition security and demonstrate a net zero agriculture practices at scale. Believe in this, articulate this, shift the narrative around this approach. Farmer cooperatives are becoming rallying points for action on ground and have the proven potential to create impact through adoption of climate smart initiatives, as well as to attract investments, build the capacities of farmer organizations, and utilize them to become the change agents on ground. Third one, anything to do with climate is around data. Invest in building a data foundation upon which climate action will happen. And this data also provides a crucial evidences that boosts investor confidence. So these are the closing suggestions that I have, and all good wishes. Thank you.
That was perfect. Thanks for rounding it up so well. And now I will hand over to my colleague Kasonde, who will tell us a little bit more about the forum, after which we'll open the floor for questions. You're muted, Kasonde.
Apologies for that. Am I audible now? Thank you so much for the opportunity to add my voice. So essentially the forum that we are planning for the 8th and the 9th of August in Gaborone, Botswana, at the Gaborone International Convention Center, will bring together key players in the agricultural sector, including policymakers, investors, financial institutions, and development partners. The event will essentially feature panel discussions, key speeches, and networking sessions, providing participants with the opportunity to network, to learn, to share experiences, and forge important partnerships. So we view the forum in a very high light. We'll explore how to scale up water investments, enable enhanced rainfed agriculture systems, technologies, options for financing of enhanced rainfed agriculture methodologies and practices, such as green water funds, among other financial mechanisms. We'll also present a business case for investing in enhanced rainfed agriculture and show best practices, how to garner the support of African leaders and the donor community for these important initiatives. So in a nutshell, the overall aim of the forum is to attract increased, enhanced, long-term investments into the smallholder agriculture sector across the Zambezi watercourse and Africa, the African continent at large. So we have important topics that we'll be discussing. As I've indicated, we'll be developing the business case for enhanced rainfed agriculture in Africa. We'll be connecting innovative actions with technical and financial support. And lastly, we'll be exchanging knowledge on attracting finance to the rainfed agriculture sector. So there are a number of key participants that we are earmarking for this important event. We have the ZAMCO member states, the states representatives from the 8 riparian states, representatives from organizations working directly with farmers in Africa, such as NGOs, cooperatives, and the private sector. As CIWI, we have signed partnership agreements. We are working with a number of organizations within the Zambezi watercourse. So the footprint of the Tiara project is front and center in Malawi, in Zambia, as well as Zimbabwe. We're also looking at development finance institutions, multilaterals, as well as bilaterals, commercial firms operating in the agricultural supply chains. I think this is quite important. My colleague Malisu mentioned how that some of these aspects are quite important to connect the farmer to the complete value chain. We're also targeting private capital investment firms, aiming to invest in smallholder farming, government representatives from the nations, as well as at local level. We are looking at RBOs as well as RECs, the academia, the research organizations and think tanks, and not forgetting the media, because at the end of the day, advocacy is quite important. We need to spread the word around. So the media will definitely play a very key role. Last but not the least, we are looking at at farmers' unions in and around the African continent so that they can play a key role in this important event. Thank you so much.
This is great. We've kept very well in time, and we have about 15 minutes for questions. I'm going to point these questions to certain panelists, but if someone else has inputs, or if the panelist wants to pass over the question to someone else, feel free to do so. So we have the first question that I think, Kasonde, you might be well equipped to answer. The question is, it would be great if someone would say more about what the investment does. In other words, what are the changes that are being sought or achieved?
Yeah, so I think we've heard how that there's a lopsided, nature in the investment that goes into enhanced rainfed agriculture. So one of the aim is to tackle this very challenging aspect where we are hoping to increased flows of finance into the enhanced rainfed agriculture sector, because a lot of farmers have the technical know-how, they are practicing the enhanced rainfed agriculture methods, but there's lacking of implements, for instance. I think it was said earlier that you want to do your farming venture, but you do not have access to implements, you do not have access to seed, to fertilizers, and so forth. So there's a lot that needs to happen. State finance, unfortunately, is not flowing into the enhanced rainfed agriculture. The vast majority goes to irrigated agriculture. So what we hope to do through some of these advocacy events, like the forum that we are going to be hosting in Botswana, we hope to spread the word around that enhanced rainfed agriculture methods are bankable, they are available, they are being utilized, but we need to use them at scale, and this will involve increased finance to the sector. Thank you.
The next question, I think, Lidi, you might be able to answer this for us. How can we close the gap between private investors and smallholder farmers? In Mozambique, 80% of the solar pumps are sold to NGOs and later given to smallholder farmers. However, at the end, the gap between farmers and companies still exists. Wouldn't it make more sense to invest in studying different business cases, business models, so that farmers are the ones who pay for their pumps?
Yeah, that's the billion-dollar question. Huh? How can we have private sector investing more in small-scale farming? So maybe I could respond in saying that that depends on what we mean by private sector investment. You know, initially we would be thinking about commercial returns, and then we realize it's not possible. But I think that even with private sector investing in technologies, developing new technologies, innovating, it's a way of supporting directly or indirectly farmers on the ground. And again, you know, mechanism like we've been discussing and what we're trying to identify with CIWI and to bring visibility to are mechanism which would channel more investment from private sector using different type of criteria, you know, like environment is one of them, with recognizing more that farmers are at the forefront of managing natural resources. We get access to another source of funding that was not before explored. So yeah, I don't have like the clear answer in saying we should do this and that, but I think it's with widening the way we see private sector and trying to facilitate their interaction with small scale farmers.
Mark or Mitchell, do you have any responses to the same question? Or we can move on to the next.
I would just add, actually, sorry, Mark, did you want to? Somebody was talking.
You carry on, Arlene, you carry on.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to add to that, actually, that it's absolutely true, but it's the issue of exactly what you're calling the private investor, you know, the private sector. What type of investment is it? You know, is it an investment in kind? Is it investment in, you know, low interest loans, as I said before? I mean, you know, typically you talk about an investor being equity, and that's a whole other conversation and actually a whole other forum. So I think just to, you know, kind of even add to this conversation, it's a conversation that will continue until you know, intelligent people get together and really realize that we need to work all as a team, private sector, government, development, finance. There's got to be a way to team together to get rain-fed agriculture invested in. And there's many opportunities. We just have to kind of strategize. Basically saying what Liddy said in a different way. Thank you, Liddy.
You're welcome.
Briefly from my part, I think to help to kind of, you know, do what we're going to do in terms of raising profile and so on, it'd be interesting to know what the actual approximate unit costs are of some of the things you're talking about, like talking just now about the, you know, implements were needed, seeds was needed. I mean, how much do these things actually cost? Because I'm just thinking, like, for example, we are donating 15 euros for every ticket we sell for our conference to you know, to Regen, and then by association through to the projects. What does 15 euros buy? And out of curiosity for me, how much is a solar tractor? Because they sound fascinating. So I mean, are we talking tens of thousands, or you know, what's because I think if we can take this down to a small level, you know, and as well as all the, you know, the big discussion that is necessary at corporate and government level and so on, but if we can, like from my perspective, we can say 15 euros buys whatever, I think that would you know, that would also help to raise the profile from a different direction. So you don't have to give me the catalogue now. It's just something that I'd like to see, you know. So when we're doing the conference and so on in October, you know, we can actually kind of really articulate these things.
All right. And so Krishnan, maybe you can take this one. What kind of investments are we talking about? Climate information services across scales? I'm not sure the question is very clear, but maybe you're able to answer that.
That's right. Can you please repeat the second sentence that you mentioned?
What kind of investments are we talking about?
Right.
Climate information service across scales?
Mm-hmm. All right. Not very clear, but still I will try to answer this. The kind of investments into climate resilient agriculture system typically comes in 2-3 ways. One is helping the farmers to adopt and adapt to the climate changing situation. That means changing the agricultural practices on ground. So that is one way of investments that comes in. And this is typically either government or philanthropy investment that come into this side of it. The second is the market related investments, where certification, traceability, issues like carbon credit, etc., goes a long way in the market itself, making some advanced commitments, and later taking reimbursements from the farmers out of that. That requires an enormous and creditworthy, credible data systems to be put in place. The market should be able to trust that data that we are developing. The third one is, again, as I mentioned earlier, the public financing or the multilateral, bilateral financing. That typically comes when we have got an idea which is proven, there are enough evidences, and that goes for dramatic scale across various regions, etc. And across all these, one area is around, when we talk about climate, is around the new technologies like remote sensing, like drone, like blockchain. These are becoming increasingly rallying points for the market as well as the philanthropy to trust, and those can be considered as what we call as the climate information systems, including hyperlocal weather data, sensors on ground, etc. But that there's enormous investment that goes into all those things, not necessarily very useful for very small holding land systems. Those kind of technology works in large land systems, not small holding land systems.
And a very quick one for Felix. I know that you have already answered in the chat, but you mentioned the need to support local production of agricultural products. Should there also not be support for affordable irrigation, so that besides rain-fed in the wet season, also well-fed for the dry season? So I think the question is trying to say that, should you also not support affordable irrigation products besides those that are used for rain-fed agriculture during the dry season? So does government support exist to train local private investors in production of low-cost wells and pumps?
Yes, and there is need on top of rain-fed agriculture in order for farmers to be, increase productivity, but also to be working the whole year, instead of harvesting on one season when it is raining. Yes, there's need to support affordable irrigation systems, and this is also played, it is a role that has to be played by the government in most cases, of course, with the developing partners, so that private sector can be attracted, when the irrigation systems are available to farmers of all ranges, small farmers, medium-sized farmers. Boreholes in the region are used, especially it's much more developed in Zimbabwe. I have seen boreholes being attached to, irrigation systems, small-scale irrigation systems, including horticulture of 2 acres, 3 acres. That also is a matter of livelihood. It supports, the cost of running boreholes, but also it gives livelihoods and additional food supplements and, food security to the communities. So yes, it is important to also leverage on the other resources and invest in irrigation systems, including boreholes and dams, affordable ones.
Okay, Lidi, this question is for you. Have economic analysis been undertaken regarding the investment? For example, costs, benefits, period of return? Seems like those would be critical for driving investments by actors on and off farm.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know who asked it because I can't see the name of the organization, but that's exactly the role of the Tiara program. And that's exactly why we wanted to showcase our business case at the forum. So basically what we do with our partners locally, namely the NGOs which are working with farmers, we're collecting data, we're collecting information that we think would be relevant to prove that with investing into rainfed agriculture, you've got return on investment. And when we can return on investment, it is definitely increase in terms of the yields, but it's also all the other benefits. And our role within ITIARA initiative is to package that so that we can demonstrate using different pilots project and our local partners that it can be a good investment when we invest into those farmers. So that's exactly what we're trying to do and what we will be showcasing during the forum.
And Kasonde, I think this was already answered, but will there be NGOs at the forum? Yes. If so, which ones? Could you name a few? And how many farmer cooperatives are within the targeted region?
Thank you so much. Yeah, so we are extending an invitation to NGOs within the agriculture sector. As I indicated, we have partnered with a number of them. In Malawi, we expect TN Trust to be represented. They actually have a slot on the program where they'll be sharing some of the methods that they're using in enhanced rainfed agriculture in Malawi. We also have Komako from Zambia. They have quite a huge footprint in and around the country, working with small-scale farmers, implementing conservation agriculture methods. So they will be represented as well at the forum. In Zimbabwe, we have two organizations. We have the Community Technology Development Trust. They also are working with over 900,000 farmers in Zimbabwe, using conservation agriculture methods. They will also be represented at the forum. And last but not the least, we have Fashig, who also share with us some of the methods around farming method called Fumvuza, which is quite popular in Zimbabwe, looking at the tonnage per hectare, the increase, the results will speak for themselves through the pilot projects that they've been implementing since we entered into partnership agreements with them late last year. They've been able to show that using some of these methods, there can be a very steep increase in the yield per ton per hectare. So these are some of the NGOs that will be represented at the forum. Thank you so much.
Sorry, there's one last question for you, Kasonde.
Okay.
This forum is about rainfed agriculture, but is there an idea or room for attention to small on-farm wells, small-scale irrigation?
Yeah, essentially, yes, there is, because at the end of the day, the Tiara project that we're implementing in the Zambezi watercourse, it looks at, preservation or, catching of rain that falls during the rainy season and making it available during the dry months. So some of the methods that we use, using sand dams, earth dams, and so forth. And from there, you reticulate to your crops. So that is the form of enhanced rainfed agriculture, irrigation at a small scale for the smallholder. So there is definitely room for representation at this forum, because at the end of the day, we are using, water harvesting methods, in any form. Is it over a stream, you dam it using earth and so forth, and then you reticulate to your crops. So they are very welcome. We expect representations at that scale. Thank you.
We are dot on time. It's 3 o'clock. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you so much for your time, panelists and speakers. This recording will be available online, and we will share that with you. Thank you so much for joining today.
All the best.